Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm really excited today. I'm speaking with Tom Turcich, and he's actually the 10th person to walk around the world in 7 years. I think it's like 28,000 miles and six different continents that he went on. And he did this all of his dog, Savannah. So Savannah gets the award for being the first dog to go around the world. But Tom, he's the 10th. And I was so intrigued, I think, by his story, which actually was just recently published in a book. I do recommend that you check it out. It's called The World Walk. And what really I think stuck out about his story was the fact that it seemed there was a deep meaning to why he did this walk. It wasn't just, at least from what I read and the interviews he's had already, it wasn't just about being someone to walk around the world. It was about learning more about life and its meaning. And kind of what drove him to do this was the death of a friend that actually started him out on this journey. So I wanna, Tom, I want to kind of start out. I don't know if this is maybe too deep or an odd way to start out at first, but what, after this 7 year journey, what do you think life means? Because that seemed to be the point of your walk, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but what do you think life means now?
I mean, yeah, it's a big question, difficult one to answer. I would say, I mean, in a certain way, I don't think there is any meaning, and that what's
Okay.
important is that you make your own. I also think that, to do that, to make your own meaning, and to live like a well balanced life, a life that brings you joy and happiness and significance. I think it's important to lean into your humanity. What I mean is just like accept that you're human and that not everything's going to go your way, and that working 10, 12, 14 hours a day isn't necessarily the way to happiness. And it's better to get outside, to be hanging out with your friends, to hang out with family, to have Sunday dinners. And so, yeah, I think if there is a purpose of life, it's to be happy and to create happiness for other people. And I think the best way to do that is to, yeah, lean into your humanity and do your best to be the best human that you can be, in the sense of, not trying to demand too much of yourself, not to become an automaton of efficiency and effort, but to, just enjoy the trees waving and good coffee and time with friends and family.
Did you always feel that way before you started your journey, or was it after the journey that you came to the conclusion that life is something it doesn't have like a meaning itself, you have to make one?
Yeah, I probably was somewhere in me the whole time, but it wasn't
Okay.
until like a year and a half into walking, after I'd spent so much time with myself. And then I was in the desert for months down in Peru and Chile. And I remember getting to this point where I had the thought that I had thought all the thoughts. When you're walking, it's just this meditation constantly, and you spend so much time with yourself and you reflect on your choices and how your parents influenced you and the mistakes you made. And you look at your life in all these different ways that eventually you run out of ways to look at it. And so I had reached that
Hmm.
point way down in South America where I thought, I have no thoughts left to think. And I was laying under the stars in the Atacama Desert and wondering, what does a person build their life on when you're just this little speck of time and space in the face of infinity? What do you build your life on? And the only thing I think that matters, is happiness. And it's a very abstract idea, but when you look at everything else, when you look at ambition or security or fame or, money, wealth, all those things are ultimately in the aim of becoming happier. And,
Hmm.
ideally, if you're altruistic, is to make other people happier. But so I think that's what I came down to. Well, that's the base of things, is happiness and trying to and create happiness for other people.
How did your friend's death kind of set off? this desire for finding meaning and doing this whole journey in the first place?
So my friend Emery died when she was 16 and I was 17. And it obviously was just at a very formative time for me of 17 and
That's
just learning.
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah, devastating. And the thing about Emery was that she was the nicest person I knew. And I'd known her my whole life. And I'd known of death intellectually, but it wasn't until Emery died that I really felt it and that I understood that, if Emery can die, who's so much better than I was, then so can I. And so can my friends, so can my family.
Could
And
I
so then,
ask real quick
yeah,
how she died?
it's a jet ski accident, a very freak jet ski
Oh,
accident.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So very abrupt in the summer, totally arbitrary and random. I think that was part of it too, was that it just came out of nowhere.
Were you
And
there?
no, no, I was back home. I was in a car with my friends when we got the call and were told that she had passed. And yeah, so it was this introduction to death and that I had to reckon with basically and integrate into my life. And
Hmm.
so then it left me in this fog for months looking for an answer, some way out, some something out of the fog. And eventually someone played Dead Poet Society in a speech and communications class that I had. And that was like, oh, carpe diem, seize the day, death is going to happen, but right now you have this incredible opportunity, make the most of it. And so then I latched onto that. And then I thought about, okay, I only have a limited amount of time. How do I make the most of the limited amount of time here? And it really became a question of what do you value? What do you want out of life? And ultimately came to the answer I wanted to travel, wanted to be forced into adventure, and wanted to understand the world. Those are the things I wanted out of my brief time here. And then looking for different ways to travel, I discovered Carl Bushby and Steve Newman, these two guys who had walked around the world. And that was like the answer. That seemed like the best way to make the most of life, at least a life that was meaningful to me.
Have you think after this time that you've spent, obviously 7 years, long time, all this time thinking, do you think you've come to, like, is it still hard for you that for your friend, her death didn't matter in the essence of life not really having a meaning at all?
No, I mean, I think that's like one of the like most important lessons, and I think it's this lesson that is really great at building empathy and understanding the world is that you are very tiny and and it doesn't matter how much willpower you have and how driven you are. There are just greater forces that affect everyone's lives. I mean, I would pass through these villages all around the world. I remember in one in particular, I remember walking through this village in Turkey and just thinking like how many thousands of years had this village been here and how many people lived very full lives here and had hopes and dreams and they were farmers and you never heard about them or their shepherd and you never heard about them or they're just a wife and that's it, that's their existence, and then they're gone into the ether, and that's
Yeah.
everywhere around the world. And so, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily anymore that maybe it's challenging. I think when I was younger, it's probably challenging to reckon with that really you're very small and one individual life really doesn't matter that much. And in the grand scheme of things, none of the lives matter in a certain way. But that's also like liberating in a certain way. And because you know the ending is already decided. So you may as well live as best you can in between until that ending comes and take some risks. And but it's a matter of knowing what you want out of life and then being willing to kind of fail and screw up and be okay if things go wrong.
What do you think's the riskiest thing you did on your 7 year walk?
Probably walk El Salvador. Looking back, it was the most violent month of the most violent year in its modern history, and that's when I was there. And yeah, it was pretty reckless in a certain way, but I also knew if I skipped it, I would always regret skipping it. So yeah, I passed through El Salvador in a very violent time, I would say.
Is there a story you can share to kind of depict that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a few days in, I saw a husband and wife who had been executed, that their bodies were laying in a field, and they were surrounded by police, masked police, so the gangs couldn't identify the policemen. And so, yeah, I mean, I saw, a husband and wife, and then a little while later, these journalists who were there at the scene called up with me and they wanted to interview me. They just saw I was passing through with a dog in a baby carriage and they wondered what I was doing. And so I ended up getting this interview with some local news and asking them about it. And they were like, yeah, I mean, they had like 8 kids and it was probably the gangs that murdered the parents. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that's what was happening in El Salvador.
Did you see like a lot of um like death while you were going through different countries?
No, that was the only time. I'd say the
Okay.
majority of the world is a very safe place, and that story is not emblematic of what the world is actually like. It's kind of thing where, if any sort of media, obviously the goal is to entertain and to provide something of interest. And so inherently within that, the stories are about things that are remarkable in some way or another. And really, when you get out in the world, there's not that many stories day to day. It's you pass through a village and it's 10,000 people living peacefully, and there's no
Hmm.
story there. You can't say, oh, 10,000 people live peacefully today here. And that's kind of how it is almost everywhere. It's just people living their lives, making a little money, trying to hang out with their family. And that just is over and over and over again. And so, yeah, the world is a very safe place. I was helped so many times, given food and water so many times, offered shelter so many times. And, there's no way I could have walked around the world without, this immense amount of kindness that I was shown.
What country did you feel the most rest in?
The most rest,
Like internal rest.
maybe Turkey. Turkey was in the later stages of my walk, and so it's very comfortable with where I was in the walk. Turkey is a really safe country. The people are incredibly warm. And I would kind of just camp wherever. And I knew if someone found me, they'd be really friendly and they'd probably have a dog that was really friendly. And so I never slept better than when I was in Turkey. And also, you have great food and good infrastructure and this beautiful confluence of architectures and culture. So it's just a really incredible country that I ended up spending a lot of time in because it's a big country too. So yeah, Turkey was, I would say, felt the most rest in.
And the food was your favorite too?
Food is up there, definitely. Georgia has incredible food. Georgia has its own cuisine, which can't really get anywhere else. A lot
Hmm.
of walnuts in there, fatty, umami, curd cheeses. That is really good. Peru had incredible ceviche, and it was like $5 for a bowl of ceviche, and it was so
Wow.
good and fresh. That was heavenly. And Mexico too. Mexico has phenomenal food pretty much throughout the whole country. And then let's see, like the French croissant, it's a classic, but I would like I would wake up from dreams of croissants every morning. And I couldn't wait to get the next one. So yeah, that's definitely up there.
Did you it was right on the tip of my tongue. I was gonna say, did you get any food poisoning from 7 years of traveling?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not a food poisoning, but I definitely had something in Mexico for sure. I had probiotics for the first month or so, and then as soon as those ended, my stomach was just like destroyed for a week or so, and I
Oh.
ended up taking a pack of antibiotics, and that sorted it out. But other than that, the walking is so gradual that you have your body has time to adjust. Whereas if you just fly in and then you start eating the local cuisine and the local water right away, it's more of a shock to the system. But because I was walking, kind of always had this gradual transition,
Hmm.
whether it's culturally or physically or, the like climate wise, but with food too, so I had this slow introduction to these different bacterias that generally was enough of like a buffer for me to weather it pretty well.
So like coming back to America, is like it boring here compared to everywhere else you've been?
Boring in what way?
Well, I mean, In America, things are, uh, we really value comfortability. We really value being safe. We really value having things we need, but our definition of needs are definitely different, I think, than what we actually need. But we're very used to comfortability, and that requires a lot more than just basic necessities. Um, so, I mean, coming back from that and coming to America and American culture and seeing the differences based on the other countries you've been in, I mean, do you think that, for you, like I know you were born in America, is America still something that you find to be a really great country compared to the other countries you've been to? Or did you think a little less of America upon coming back after that very long journey?
It's complex because I am definitely very grateful to have been born in America and been born with an American passport. Like the walk would not have been possible without an American passport, and wouldn't have been possible with if I wasn't born in like a wealthy state in the wealthiest country in the world. I was able
Mm-hmm.
to get a sponsor and save good money. And then also I can criticize America, which, not every citizen of their own country can do.
Yeah.
And so I feel grateful that I can, criticize America. But I will say it is boring, I think, because I really think it just stems from the car culture in America. I think it's very, very isolating and it destroys kind of community that is much more common in other places. I mean, rather than if you're in, I mean, if you're most villages or towns around the world, they have some piazza where kind of life revolves around
Yeah.
and people just meet and maybe in the middle of the day, the old men and old women just sit in the park most of the day. And then when you get into some of the major cities, they're a little bit more pedestrianized. They're dense enough where you have a lot going on. And most American cities are just like big suburbs with like the downtown being where some skyscrapers and some business are. And having to drive everywhere, it doesn't leave any space for serendipity or for just meeting someone or for you're walking down the street and you see a cafe and you go, oh, I'm just going to hang out here because I feel like it. And then you strike up a conversation or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so it makes every choice feel like a choice. I have to go to the gym, so I work out and I check that box, and then I'm going to go hang out with my friends, and so I socialize, and then I check back that box, and then I go home and I meditate for 30 minutes, and I check that box, rather than it being like this nice flow of a day, and you're bumping into people and you're discovering things in cities and areas that are more pedestrian friendly and that are more bike friendly and less car centric. So I think that is the primary
Hmm.
like source of boredom in America is that there's just not a lot of serendipity and there's not a lot of community built into like the structure of towns and cities.
Do you, coming back, like, have you changed the way you live in America to kind of mimic in a way? I mean, it can't completely, obviously, but mimic in a way that peaceful kind of flow and ease in a sense, and not all this pressure and checklists that you had on your journey when you were traveling?
Yeah, definitely. So my fiance is a emergency medicine doctor in UC at University of Cincinnati. And so we are living in northern Kentucky across the Ohio River for the next 2.5 years, moved there a year and a half ago. And I picked the neighborhood where we live because it's like a block from the river. We're close to this pedestrian bridge and we can get downtown pretty easily. And the neighborhood we're in is it's a very small but little historic district of maybe like 8 by 6 blocks, something like that. There's a lot of old trees, there's coffee shops, a couple neighborhood bars. And when we were looking for places to live, the places that you get sent from people who are already there are like they're the quote unquote nice neighborhoods and they're just like big, white, boring suburbs. And I'm like, if I move into the suburbs and especially like working from home, like I'm just dying such a slow death basically with nothing to do. It's like I can't have that. So I chose the neighborhood kind of like to structurally give myself the ability to walk to places and to bike to places and to run into people and to have like a neighborhood feel like we're very close with all of our neighbors because we're a little bit closer together.
Hmm.
And I don't have a car, so I rely a lot on my bike and being close to things and being accessible. So yeah, it was like a very purposeful decision, and one that I wouldn't have made before traveling. I don't think I would have known what to look for. I would have just went for what looks nice, quote unquote, or what people tell me is nice, but actually doesn't add to your happiness or to your sense of community.
Yeah. How about social media? How's that been for you?
Oh, so I would love to delete it, but it's such an important thing that, I still have it, and it's a great source of community for me in a certain way where, I had people follow my walk for all 7 years, and they're very invested in me and Savannah, and so it's nice to share moments of importance with them. But yeah, I think I'm also going to get the Light Phone 3, I think is what it is. I like go back and forth with just wearing a smartwatch so I can get rid of the phone and not be scrolling. But then sometimes you need the phone, and then I find myself spending 2 hours like doing nothing on it. I'm like, what did I just do? And so everyone has that experience. So I think I'm going to switch phones to something like dumber, quote unquote, so I can hopefully extract myself from that. But yeah, I think that's just like an everyone problem.
Well, I was gonna ask you because my husband and I been to Ghana twice, and I remember being in Ghana and seeing people have phones, but like they didn't even have electricity or they didn't have enough money for food, but they always had a phone and a phone that
Mhm.
worked. And that really was mind-blowing for me because it was just interesting to see like there were so many things they needed, but they always had the phone.
Yeah.
And that's one thing they could always connect with you on is I have a phone too. What's your WhatsApp? And we can like talk, which was cool in a way, but also I was always like, why do you have a phone if you don't have this? I'd always like pick the other thing besides a phone. When you were traveling, like, did everyone have a phone?
Well, I think to go back on the Ghana, I think the Ghana is like that was a lot of the mobile banking. I think that's a lot of the reason that they use it is they don't have traditional banks and they can't get online, so they can bank just through like text messages. And Africa
Wow.
was they kind
Okay.
of skipped over, a lot of the infrastructure that like countries that developed earlier, and so they just went straight to mobile phones. And like, okay, we'll just bank on this because it's what is accessible to everyone. I think that's
Hmm.
probably part of the reason why they have it. But I would say, yeah, for the most part, everyone had phones. That was a nice thing about walking around the world when I did was that the world is very connected. And not always had internet, but probably, like 90% of the time I had internet, unless I was really removed from a place. So I could, when I stopped in a hotel, I could video call my family or friends. And, when I was out, wherever I was out, I could, read the news or, look up what the next mountain pass is like. And was never too far from like the safety or the comfort of accessibility in that way. Yeah, I think most people had phones, and I think I couldn't imagine doing it in like the 70s or 80s when you're totally detached and you're just walking around with a paper map. That would be just crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, that would be kind of scary. I mean, I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
but with your dog, Savannah, right?
hmm
Um, did you have conversations with like, were there times where it was just you and your dog for so long that you would just talk to Savannah and have a conversation with her?
Not full conversations, but I would definitely say things, definitely, long day, oh, great campsite tonight. Yeah, I definitely talked to her for sure. It's just us out there, and we spent every minute of every day together pretty much. But yeah, I wasn't like, full blown delusion. Wasn't having full on conversations with her.
No, but it's so funny. I never had pets for growing up. And then I recently, my husband and I got this cat and he's so friendly. And I find such comfort sometimes in just, you're right, not having like full on conversations. I guess that might seem weird to people, I suppose, but that it's actually, sometimes it feels like they're actually listening to you and they're engaging. Which I don't know if that's true or not, but it's so interesting to see um sometimes the emotional connection that pets have with humans. And I was like, if you're journeying this long with this dog, you guys must be like blood brothers in a way or something.
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, she was the only other one out there with me, and I was the only one with her, and went through a lot of terrain, a lot of challenges, a lot of hardships, and a lot of joy. and it was just us. And, and like I said, we spent every minute of every day together, basically, for 7 years. And so our bond is like unlike anything else. And then also, like with dogs, how the bond is because the love is so pure and they're so well intentioned. And also, I think it was deeper even for us because, in a certain way, the world is unfriendly to dogs. It's tough for a dog to be on its own in a lot of places. They get rocks thrown at them. Or like for me, trying to get a hotel room for us sometimes and they don't want it, or people just being a little dismissive or mean to Savannah. And so through these 7 years, I was always her protector.
Hmm.
And I would only ever sleep where she slept. So if she wasn't getting accepted in the hotel room, then I wasn't going into the hotel room kind of thing. And that was just the deal I made. And so I think that strengthened our bond as well, at least me towards her, because, I felt like she was not my child, but that I had like this obligation to defend her against the world and these strays and whatever else we're encountering. So we had that. Um, and then yeah, we spent a lot of time together. We had a lot of beautiful moments together. And um, so the bond was unlike anything else for sure.
Did you ever come close to losing her in some way?
I in Chile, in Peru, she picked up this bacteria or a tick infection that I didn't know about.
Hmm.
And then when we were in the desert, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, we were resting against a concrete median in the middle of the day. And the Atacama Desert is the driest desert in the world. It's almost 0% humidity at night. And so we're out there and she walks into the desert and she sneezes and blood just kind of comes out of her nose like water. Like there's no
Ew.
thickness to it at all. And she's bleeding and bleeding like crazy. Eventually, I'm able to wave down a car, and it's a long story. It's in the book. It's a long story. She ends up being okay after a few days. I'm able to get her to a vet and like get out of the desert. And it turned out to be this ehrlichiosis, it's called. It's very common down there. The vet right away like knew what it was, and so they were able to, patch her up. But in the moment, it was like she was, I think she was very close to dying. Yeah.
Hmm. How about you? Did you ever have a point when you thought you were gonna die on your journey?
Well, yeah, I had a bacterial infection from South America that definitely nearly killed me. I lost 45 pounds and was just in agony for months until an antibiotic started to work and I recovered. And then also I was held up at a gunpoint, a shotgun point in Turkey. And I thought, yeah, I'm probably like, they're going to pull the trigger and that'll be that. It turned out not to be that. They were plainclothes military and it all worked out fine. But in the moment, I didn't know that. And yeah, I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to die.
But how did you with the bacterial infection? How did you get medicine? Did you just because how would you communicate with people if you didn't understand? If language wise,
Well,
how would you?
that was after South America. And so it was this
Okay.
gradual, I had returned home to get Savannah's paperwork to get into Europe. And then I started walking Ireland and Northern Ireland and Scotland then. And the progression was very gradual. And then eventually I took a train when it was bad and I realized something's really wrong. I took a train to London, spent a month in and out of infectious disease there in the Royal London Hospital, and then actually flew home, saw more doctors, and they couldn't figure out what it was, but they just started throwing antibiotics at me, and one of them worked, and I recovered. So I was luckily then it wasn't like I was way removed from society, and it was gradual, and
Okay.
so I was able to get good treatment, like kind of.
So 7 year long journey was in part because there were breaks. It wasn't just like constant.
Yeah, it was a break from that. That was like 4 or 5 months that I had the bacterial infection. And then COVID was the same. COVID was, I guess, like a 5 month stop. And it also caused me to miss out on three countries that I was hoping to hit, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Australia. I was planning on hitting, but I got stuck in Azerbaijan for 6 months at the outbreak of COVID. And I was able to get into Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia, but then Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Australia remained closed for
Hmm.
a while. And so I wasn't able to get into them.
So those are ones you haven't been to yet?
Correct. Yeah.
are you going to go back and do them?
I would love to go to like Kazakhstan and Mongolia for sure. I would love to walk in Mongolia. It seems incredible. Get a horseman and a guide and a horse to carry my things and walk across the steppe. That would be amazing. But no plans right now.
Do you, did this 7 year long journey give you like a first for travel, or like after you finished, you were like, I'm done. I'm good now.
I love traveling. I think traveling's fantastic. It's a great way to grow. I think traveling by walking was so different though, and it was much more satisfying. I've traveled a few times since the end. I went to the Bahamas and was in Italy and Malta and in France recently. But the like traveling in sort of this touristic way where you pop in for, 10 days or a week or 2 weeks even, it feels more like I'm going to extract something. I'm trying to take something away and like retain it for myself. Like I'm trying to go and I'm trying to gain something from this country. Whereas when I
Mhm.
was walking, I felt much more immersed and part of the culture, and the lessons were more gradual. And I didn't feel like I was taking so much. I didn't feel like I was there just to have this experience and then go back home with it and be able to tell everyone, look, oh, I had this experience. So I do really enjoy traveling, but it does the way that I travel now feels a lot cheaper than the walking did.
Hmm. Did you, was there an encounter with someone in some country that was very, um, impactful for you?
A lot of them, yeah, there's a lot of people. I would say the one that comes to mind is I stayed with this older couple, or just like a couple in Georgia in Tbilisi, and he was a an economist, and he was the economic advisor for the president of Tbilisi, and then he was also the economic professor at the University of Tbilisi. And he just saw the world in such a different way than I did that I think spending time with him really impacted me. And also, he was like so effective in the world, and all his friends were the members of parliament. And when I was there, it was during these protests to strengthen this young democracy. So, spending time with him was really impactful on kind of how I saw the world and what I thought of as important versus not important, and how a society functions and what matters to people. So yeah, I would say him was uh, Giga is his name. Giga was very influential.
How did you see the world?
Well, he's very capitalistic, which I think coming from like America, you almost have this disdain for capitalism because it's like the heart of capitalism. But he grew up in Soviet Georgia and just saw how unfair the communist economy was, where if you were in with the Communist Party, you could shop at a different shop and get better clothes and better food, whereas for
Hmm.
everyone else, you get whatever they gave you. And then he would study at Berkeley and study economics there. And so has this, and Georgia's a young democracy, and it's just removed since 1991, has its independence.
Hmm.
And so he thinks this is a really strong way to better people's lives. And then on top of that, all his friends are, again, these MPs and other influential people in the country trying to make their country more democratic. And so I really saw like the value and the fight and the need for like proactive act towards building a democracy. And then
Hmm.
also from even before getting to Georgia, I walked through a few dictatorships, autocracies, and there is just like this slight difference in there. And it's very subtle. It's also really profound. And it's just like the conversations are a little bit less free. They're a little bit self-censored. You just don't talk about certain things.
Hmm.
And there's all these weird quirks in places that you get in autocracy or democracy, like these arbitrary rules that don't make any sense. And you get that in every country, but it feels more pronounced in these other countries. I remember in Uzbekistan, you couldn't stand on grass. I think you could then, but until a few years ago, you couldn't stand on grass because the previous dictator outlawed it because it was like mostly desert and it was difficult to grow, but they wanted that beauty of the grass, and so it was illegal to stand on the grass. And so it was
Oh
like this
my
weird thing. And I
gosh.
remember like people staring at me because it's just like unthinkable. So you get these weird things, and again, like the conversation feels differently. So when I got to Georgia, and these people are so passionate about their young democracy and fortifying their young democracy, yeah, it made it like help show me the value of democracy in a certain way.
Hmm. That's so interesting. Did you ever get to go to Israel?
No, I never made it that far south, as far south as I got in the Middle East.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, I was like, especially if what's going on now, I wonder if you had seen like the distinction between like Palestinians and Jews and kind of that, um, what that felt like,
Yeah, I
that
didn't make it
distinction
down
there.
there, unfortunately.
Um, was there a culture that if you couldn't live in America, that's where you would go?
Probably Denmark, I would say.
Oh,
Very,
really?
yeah, yeah, very peaceful. They don't work too hard, but they're all still very well educated somehow and very well paid. And they have a functioning healthcare system. And you just ride around on your bike all day, pretty much in Copenhagen, and get coffee and hang out with your kids at the playground. And yeah, I would say Denmark was a fantastic place. It was also one of the first cities where I realized it wasn't cities that I disliked, it was the cars in the city. And
Hmm.
when the cars are out of the city, you're just kind of riding around and you're like in a big adult playground. You're getting drinks and coffee and seeing art, all pretty peacefully. Yeah, and then they have a great, they have a great social net, which is nice. And then so you don't have to worry about other people and don't have to worry about yourself as much.
Did you see Italy?
I did, loved Italy. Yeah, Italy's fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what is the best city there, you think? Because I know a lot of people, I actually had one person tell me not to go to Rome because it was not what it's looks, it's like it's is in tourist kind of magazines and things. It's not as great. Um, but for you, like, was there a specific town or city that you were like, this is just really idyllic, or I really love this, or it captured the Italian spirit really well?
Yeah, I would agree with the take on Rome. I think you need a day there at most. That's fine. Um, yeah, there's a lot of great places. There are a lot of little towns that I really loved in Italy, and I think that's when Italy's at its best, is when you're kind of removed from the tourist path, and then you really see like this really beautiful quality of life and existence in these smaller villages where everyone knows everyone, and you've had generations of people working in the same industry as their parents and their grandparents and whoever else. So if you can get off like the tourist path and into the villages, I think it becomes really beautiful. But for like a bigger city, I loved Palermo in Sicily. I think Palermo was gorgeous, and um, it's been taken over a bunch of times. It's an island, so there's pretty unique architecture there. Great food, walkable, quiet, not as touristy. So yeah, I'd say Palermo would definitely be up there for me.
Did you go to Naples?
I did, yeah. Naples is cool, yeah.
Is
Bigger
that
city.
really, is it very touristy?
It's not as much as Rome, but it's definitely touristy. And just big. It's a big city though. You are in a city. It's not like a small city where you still kind of feel like you're discovering something.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go because that's where my grandmother actually immigrated from, but I've always thought of it when, at least when she described it or talked about it, I guess it wasn't as big as it is now.
Oh, I mean, you should go. It's great. Yeah, I definitely recommend it. And it's the heart of pizza.
Yeah, it is. I know. There's, there's so many places you want to go, but as you said, I mean earlier, I don't know if it's an American culture thing, but money is always a huge concern. And
Sure.
that's always, but um, I wanted to ask you one last question because I want to be respectful of your time, but you know, is there one way, if you could, that you would change America to be more like something else? Like, was there something in America that you're like, I wish this could be swapped with something that I had seen somewhere else? Because I know you mentioned the cars. Is there
Mhm.
anything else outside of that?
Yeah, there's a few things definitely, and I could. There's a lot of there's a bunch of things, but I would say like probably the easiest that I think could be done, and one that would really, I don't know. There's a bunch of things, but I'd just say trains. Like America needs trains so bad, and flying from like one little city to the next is such a pain, and it could be so easy. And the reason everyone is like commuting and they're miserable when they're commuting is, because everyone's driving and you don't have any other option. I'm living in Cincinnati now, and there's no regional rail. There's not even any rail in the city. And it's like we only live like a 5 hour drive from Chicago, this big city. And if there's a train that got there, even in 5 hours, even if it was less though, it's like, man, I'd be there like every weekend or something. That'd be great. And if there's a train to Philadelphia, I'd be home like every weekend. That'd be fantastic. So yeah, I think it'd be really nice if America, like every other developed country in the world, got some passenger trains.
That's funny. I guess in America, we don't really think that's developed.
Yeah, and it's
It's
yeah.
more like um electric cars and planes.
Yeah, yeah. Which neither of them will solve anything, you know. If everyone's driving an electric car, it's just as much noise and asphalt as a gas-powered car. But you get trains, you remove people from the roads, driving becomes more pleasant, and you just give people options, you know. And it also is more equitable as well, where there's this real high cost of car ownership for poor people, takes up a large portion of their income. And if something goes wrong, then you're paying 1,200 bucks or whatever to fix something. Whereas if there's more robust public transit and you don't have to have a car, then you're not tied to this machine breaking down and you don't have to pay for gas or for the maintenance. So it's more equitable as well, which I think is a good thing, especially for young people.
Yeah.
It's difficult for someone who's very young to have this big purchase and have it over their head. And if you can just go, another 5 years without having this massive purchase over you, it helps you save money, maybe buy a house, buy an engagement ring, whatever it is. So yeah, I think some passenger rail will go a long way in America.
Do you have to travel to Bethlehem tomorrow in a car?
I do, yeah. And if I took the bus, it's like an hour, 15 minute, or no, like an hour and a half drive. And I was looking at the bus. I used to take the bus up there to school. It's like a 3.5 hour bus because it like doesn't it's just very inefficient. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah, got to drive up there.
So how does that go against your principle? Like, do you feel it in your body as you're driving?
No, no, no. I mean, it's like, it's a necessary evil, but I also like enjoy taking, the train. I had interviews up in New York on Monday, and luckily from Philly, you can just take the train up there or going down to DC and take it. But no, I mean, driving's a fact of life in America. No way to avoid it, so you can't get too frustrated about it.
That's true. Well, Tom, I have to say thanks so much for this interview, and it was fascinating to hear of all you've done. And I mean, obviously your book has way more stories and anecdotes from your time, but um, I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I love the fact that you walked so much. I think there's so much to be gained from walking just in general for people, but also just it does give people time to think. And I do think as a society, especially in America, we don't like thinking very much. I think it's a little scary. And so it's really cool and neat to see that you took that journey, and hopefully other people will be inspired to maybe think a little bit more deeply about life, maybe while they're walking in a park or something.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a very pleasant conversation.
Yes, you're welcome, and have a good weekend with all your book signings. I hope they go well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye, Tom.
See you, Danielle.